Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, depending on where you are. This is Jared A. Chambers here with your Wednesday command briefing. And oh my, hasn't it just been a heck of a week already? I mean, wow. We've done 2 episodes already this week, and we've had more than enough to talk about for both episodes so far. And here we are at Wednesday. The week is flying by. As far as news and new developments on anything, very little today. A lot of people still digesting what is in the Jack Smith January 6th indictment of Trump. It's been interesting for me to go read some of the commentary on it today. As I walked through large pieces of it last night, with all of you, I had skimmed pieces of it. Some of it we were doing in real time last night, as I mentioned. In some ways, it's actually, for 45 pages, a pretty easy read because there's just not this deep grounding in legal theory. It's a narrative. It's a spin. He's told a tale of the way he wants the media to perceive things. The danger is a D.C. court is not necessarily that grounded in law either. So the hope that just because it is flimsy that it gets tossed, you really can't depend on that. But I did notice a lot of the commentary picked up on some of the same stuff that I did and that we talked about here. Chiefly that this indictment criminalizes speech. Impossible to miss. And it criminalizes thought and what you are supposed to think once an official state narrative and position has been set, limiting your ability to push back on it. In fact, I mean, this isn't my idea. I mean, somebody else posted this. I can't give due credit because I forget who said it. But really, with the theory, put forth by Smith, the legal theory put forth, Trump would still be breaking the law even if there were widespread fraud. It gives you no redress, basically, once the government has set a position on something. And most people recognize how incredibly dangerous that is. And so, that just kind of leaves us where we are today. And again, so little new coming out of this except for how is the GOP as a party going to deal with all of this? And precedent says badly. One of the other things, and I predicted this on the show last night too, this isn't the end. This is flimsy, and it was timed in a certain way based on the Devin Archer testimony. Smith and Garland and Biden and this entire corrupt administration always has something in their back pocket to use for later. There's almost certainly going to be a superseding indictment with this. They will do a time of their choosing for that, for political impact, not legal. Again, this is all politically based, and so all the pointy heads going through all the legal theory, they're going to miss a lot, knowing that this is inherently political. So what's interesting is now you're starting to see the wheat separate from the chaff on all of this, I think. Some people get what time it is here. This is a corrupt administration using the law in a way that it's never been used before, that it was never intended to be used, going back to pieces of the law intended around some very specific situations coming out of the Civil War, some very dated, archaic pieces of law and new legal theories spun around those just to get Trump. Because he is the number one competition of Biden. The polls say that Trump can beat Biden. And people say, it's polls. I mean, we don't believe polls. And look, I've been in that position before too. I've never looked at any one poll and said, okay, this poll solves this issue for me. The people have spoken, this answers it, end of story. Any one poll is just, to me, a single data point. It may have some validity, it may not. The problem is it can't be corroborated or tested in any specific way. I, too, don't look at any one poll as particularly meaningful. Now, when you have a bunch of polls, now you have a bunch of data points, and you do what any good statistician does, any good scientist does. You look at the bulk of the data, and you start to see what meaning you can derive from that. Are numbers falling within an expected range? Are we seeing consistency from one set of data to the other? What are the changes across time? What assumptions were in play in collecting the data? Is there a way that we can validate the assumptions? These are the things that you do when you have information in numbers. You don't simply just take the whole of that and disregard it too because any one of those polls may have been bad. And Trump beats Biden in a consistent way across a lot of polls now, and that's something that he didn't do against Hillary Clinton, and it's something that he didn't really do against Biden in 2020 either. And yet, in 2020, he actually performed very well if you look at bellwether states, if you look at number of counties won, if you look at raw vote total. These are things that have typically predicted the winner, and he still got within about 43 to 44,000 votes across a very limited number of states. So to say that he's weak and can't win against Biden, that logic has just really, it's been blown apart across the last several weeks here. You have to be in some kind of extreme denial at this stage to continue with the line that Trump can't win a general election. You know why? You know who really believes that Trump can win a general election? The Department of Justice. Biden, Garland, even Barack Obama, because we saw a story today. Obama apparently had a conversation with Biden about this, to not underestimate Trump, particularly around the strength that he has with his core voters. So Obama gets it, and the DOJ gets it, and yet we have Republicans who still don't know what time it is, and they don't get it. And I'm starting to have a real problem with that. Because before, what did we hear? Oh, yeah, these indictments are helping Trump, and the DOJ knows that. They want him to be the nominee because they know he's easy to beat in a general. Well, if that was the long and short of it, then it would make sense to indict him, but only to a point where they wouldn't be pushing for an early trial. They would want to leave him in the race as long as possible so that they could therefore defeat him at the ballot box. But now, even a lot of the people who were saying that before have made a shift. Now they're saying, hey, we better nominate DeSantis because, hey, what happens if blue states start pushing Trump off the ballot? What if they start changing laws in these states about being under indictment or potentially even being convicted before the general election in 2024? So now you got to nominate DeSantis, not because it helps Biden run against someone he can beat, but because it might leave us without a candidate whatsoever. Yeah, if you're really lost on that, so am I. And it's starting to become a real drag. And I've had my fill of it. I've just really had my fill of it, folks. I'm frustrated. I'm tired. We have a real existential battle for the GOP on our hands, for the country as a whole on our hands, and we're still dragging around boat anchors behind us. As I said before, and again, some people I know have a problem with this. I have changed my mind before. I went from a point of frustration with Trump in the days after he left office, looking at some of the things that could have been done differently and have led to different outcomes. With his performance as a governor, I found DeSantis to frankly be very compelling as somebody who seemed sharp, had a lot of the right policy positions, and generally a determined attitude to get things done. That was impressive. But it turned out to be other things that brought me back to Trump, particularly around foreign policy, with everything going on in Ukraine. And the fact that even when I somewhat favored DeSantis, I understood that Trump had a loyal base. I knew that if Trump decided to run, he was in the catbird seat for the nomination. Only a fool didn't realize that he was the most probable nominee. Whether you want it or not, it's immaterial. Look at the facts. He was just simply the most probable nominee, and I got that too. But we've had to just deal with dragging boat anchors along now who they're making pretzels at this point. They're twisting, they're making pretzels. On one hand, they've told us it's either going to be Trump or it's going to be DeSantis. It can't be and it won't be any of these other guys. Even though all those other guys, by the way, are a lot mathematically closer to overtaking DeSantis for the second place spot than is DeSantis knocking Trump off the top spot. All of them still have a statistical chance to at least do better than DeSantis in the delegate count and overall votes across the primary season. Well, I say all of them, not all of them. Mike Pence doesn't. Chris Christie doesn't. I don't know why they're running. Tim Scott sure does. Tim Scott could sure knock DeSantis out of second place. Vivek Ramaswamy could sure knock DeSantis out of second place. These are just statistical mathematical formulations, folks. I mean, they are within striking distance of DeSantis. They have name recognition. They get good press. They get good media. They have natural constituencies within the GOP, whether you agree with all of that or not. They do at least have a natural constituency. But yet, DeSantis or Trump, and that is what we have been beaten over the head with for a year and a half, at least since Election Day, this past midterm. That's been the story, and it's falling apart. And so with this new indictment, now 76, 78 distinct charges against Trump across 3 indictments, 1 superseding indictment, which you could, I guess, technically call 4, and still awaiting Fulton County. Yeah, we've got to start taking a more realistic look at this, folks. Before we do that, we're going to take a quick break here. And again, thank you to all of the new listeners to the new command briefing out there. We're still working out a few of the kinks, and one of those that I realized with last night's recording is some of the ad placement technology that I'm working with on the new podcasting platform. I didn't need the gaps to be quite as long as they were. So those of you, if anyone's listening live, pause for a brief second. And those of you on replay, hopefully there's no dead air after the ads that you hear. If there is, just hang on. I will be right back. Alrighty, folks. Thank you for that quick break there and standing by. We're back, and we're talking about the boat anchors that we're dragging along with us. So we have this influencer class on Twitter, and some of them are DeSantis guys and DeSantis supporters. That, on the face of it, I don't have a problem with. I know a lot of you out there do. It is their right if they prefer somebody else and they have a reason for it to articulate that reason and support it and get behind it. I don't have a problem with that. The problem that I have is just the dishonesty that I've seen about this and what the state of the race is. I mean, I saw a tweet tonight from Bob Vanderplaat still pushing this idea that in 2016, in the 2016 election cycle, Jeb was ahead. So if we just take as, for granted that Trump being in the lead means that he's the winner, well, we should have just assumed that Jeb was going to win. No, these are not the same thing. First of all, by this point in 2016, which was actually the summer of 2015, Trump was already leading at this point by a lot. Having said that, no one was over 50%. When no one's over 50% and there are multiple challengers who are at least in double digits running from the teens to the 20s, a lot of things can happen. Especially if one of those candidates who's not leading does have strength in an early state like Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, maybe some of the Super Tuesday states. That happened with McCain. He had some early state strength. Romney benefited from that as well, even though he didn't necessarily lead the whole time. None of these look like the Trump situation where you have a guy who's 40 points ahead, well over 50%, approaching 60%. And let's talk about momentum. Trump is rising. Momentum works both directions. DeSantis has been falling. He's been falling now. I mean, it looks like he probably peaked before his announcement. At best, maybe he got a slight bump on the announcement. I don't think too many polls showed that. But really, honestly, his peak is at least 2 to 3 months back now. His real high watermark versus Trump, as far as being in striking distance of Trump, was probably 6 months ago, back in the winter. Back in the winter, there were real questions that a lot of people still had. And again, for my part, knowing that Trump was the still presumptive nominee and had the strength to win, I certainly still thought during the winter months that, maybe a robust primary isn't the worst thing. Even for him, it's good practice, right? Who couldn't use a little practice from time to time to sharpen themselves on the campaign trail? It's going to be tough out there. Biden's going to spend a lot of time in the basement again, but hey, maybe for whatever reason, Biden's not the candidate. Maybe taking a fresh look at this is a good idea. But as the margins start to diverge, and Trump is well over 50%, 35 to 40 point lead, DeSantis is consistently falling. Well, now you have to look at it and say, what statistical chance does DeSantis have to win? And the answer has been, for a while now, none. There is no statistical chance that he wins. Except, what happens if Trump isn't in the race? What if Trump gets pulled from the race? What if Trump drops out? What if Trump ends up in jail? What if any number of things? And it became apparent to anyone with any sense is the what if is what the DeSantis campaign was depending on. They needed the what if. Except the what if was really, really disgusting and gross to a bunch of us. The idea that you stand ready to capitalize upon the misfortune of your opponent that is brought about by lawlessness of Democrats doesn't really make you look like a great Republican. Makes you look like an opportunist, but it doesn't make you look like a team player as far as being a Republican. And it really starts to make one question this idea that you're basically Trump, but better. And that started looking really, really hazy with this idea that you're just waiting on the DOJ, Garland, to take this guy out for you. But hey, maybe that does happen. Maybe, even though you're a sick opportunist, maybe it is a viable strategy, right? If your key opponent is no longer in the race. I mean, that's certainly what Biden's hoping for, to lose his key opponent in the race. So maybe you do benefit from that, right? Well, more and more, the polls, just like they show that it's not true that Trump can't beat Biden, it's also showing that the strength doesn't necessarily go to DeSantis if there's no Trump. What do you mean? Don't we have to have a candidate? Wouldn't this be, he's second place? Wouldn't he be the next logical person to vote for? No, DeSantis, even in the primary, a lot of Trump people are Trump-only people. Once upon a time, that seemed like maybe a short-sighted position. It seems a whole lot less short-sighted when you're looking at a world where the opposition party's Department of Justice is trying to decide who you can vote on in a primary. It suddenly looks a lot less irrational for people to be, hey, it's either Trump or I guess we just don't have a country. I can't look at those people and say that they're wrong for being only Trump at this stage of the race. So, yeah, a lot of those people, they're not voting for DeSantis even if Trump drops out. But again, you still have other candidates who are within striking distance of DeSantis. Maybe Vivek Ramaswamy does get some of those Trump voters. It's possible. Would Nikki Haley get them? No, I think not. Would Mike Pence get them? I think not. Tim Scott, he might get a few. There's no bad blood there. I mean, I'm not a huge Tim Scott fan, but has he created bad blood with Trump supporters in the way DeSantis has? No. And that's the key. And you look at this strategy of DeSantis basically perching on a limb like a vulture, waiting for the DOJ to decapitate Trump. Wouldn't it have made sense somewhere along the way for DeSantis to seem a little less transparent about his glee in that and to maybe build bridges with Trump supporters rather than having a crew, a rapid response crew, plus paid and unpaid influencers, plus what appear to be a bunch of anonymous sock puppet accounts created in the last 12 to 18 months and have well under 100 followers, all seeking to antagonize Trump supporters on a daily basis. Even now, I mean, even yesterday, I had one of the chief antagonists, this Max Nordau character, in my mentions again. So, hey, somebody out there is listening to me, folks. Join the club if you're listening to me on this podcast or if you're following me on Twitter at C4CEO. I know Team DeSantis still pays attention to what I'm saying, even though they don't like it, because I can depend on these jerks to show back up in my mentions on days like yesterday. But on a day like yesterday, man, a whole lot more people are starting to get what I said months ago, which is whether you like it or don't like it, whether Trump is your ideal president or not your ideal president. At this stage of the game, if you're not voting for Trump, what you are voting for is the success of the current administration's attempt to choose who can run against them. And that's ugly. I hate being forced into binary situations, but it is a binary situation. You can either support Trump, or you will be part of the problem in that you allowed to succeed the lawfare attempt by the Biden administration to eliminate who they thought was their number one competition. And a lot of other people are starting to pick up on that after yesterday. Other people on Twitter, there's a lot of accounts out there that you agree with them most of the time, and then they just drive you crazy other times. Shipwreck Crew is one of those people, and if you're on Twitter, you know who I'm talking about. He does a lot of legal analysis. Some of it's pretty solid, but he's worked inside the Department of Justice, so he does have a certain bias, I think, in maybe understanding how rotten to the core everything is. But he's not a stupid guy. And he's also been in the fight. He has been defending a lot of the J6 political prisoners who have been confined, detained indefinitely, and really being raked over the coals too. So I can't fault the guy in that regard. He's been in the fight. But he said today basically the same thing that I did months ago. You're at this stage either for Trump or you're for allowing the DOJ to get away with choosing which candidate runs against the sitting president. There's just no other way to have it, folks. It's one or the other. It's binary. But we're still dragging the boat anchors along. I don't know why we're having to do that. Because, okay, maybe you're still not getting that it's either Trump or voting for the DOJ to succeed. But it's just simply mindless at this point, the devotion that these people have to DeSantis as a candidate when he's just simply a bad candidate. Like, as I said, no one can beat Trump. It is either Trump or the DOJ. But even if those two things weren't true, I don't know why they're so certain that DeSantis is the guy when he's just simply proving across his campaign to not be the guy. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. We're going to go through some of the things that have happened over just the last couple of months since he's announced here that I want to talk about in identifying him as just an objectively bad candidate, because I'm hoping at least some of you will take some of this and maybe spread it around, and maybe in the same way people are starting to get that it's either Trump or the DOJ, that it took a little time, but the seeds were planted and people get it. Maybe people will start to understand that it's not just obstinance in favor of Trump that's hurting DeSantis. It's DeSantis hurting DeSantis. And that's actually a problem, because what looked like the most viable candidate for 2028, that's gone. And it's gone largely because of his own crappy strategy. So I'm going to go through some of that when we get back. We're going to take another quick break here, folks. Stand by. All right, folks, and we're back. Thank you for letting us take the brief time out there. Appreciate it. We're back. So, DeSantis, bad candidate. And I say this as objectively as possible as somebody who is very open-minded to him. And I think from that standpoint, maybe I can make that case better than some other people can. Because I know in the beginning, there were some people who didn't want to see any Trump flaws. And yes, he has them. They are there. Who didn't want to consider all of the things that are about to unfold over the next, 16 months or so until the election. A lot of people didn't want to see the big picture, didn't even consider DeSantis. Wasn't on their radar. They never would have considered him. So from having an open mind, I'm hoping that maybe I can persuade a few of you out there that the guy, he's a victim of himself at this point. Look at the statement that he made last night. Again, it's more of this, well, this weaponization of the DOJ is, I'm going to end that when I'm president. And nowhere in there was anything about this is a breach of all historical norms whatsoever, and that I will absolutely, if elected, pardon President Trump because he is, in fact, not a criminal. He had a chance once again to give a very forceful statement, and he pulled his punches. And that has been over and over and over now. He has these situations and these interviews that are set up for him to win. And he chooses to lose because he's afraid of saying something nice about Trump. Again, it's not occurred to him. His customer is the Trump voter. He cannot exist on anti-Trumpers alone. But that's who talks to him. That's who has built his strategy. And it is just not in their hearts or minds to build bridges with people that they think are dumbass cultists. And I mean, I don't say that lightly. I mean, that's the kind of language that they use when they talk to Trump supporters online. And that's where the campaign mostly exists, is online. In many ways, the campaign is an illusion. The website's bad. The logo is bad. The videos are bad. The merchandise is bad. And now I'm coming at this from my sales and marketing standpoint. And it's not just me who's seen this. Adam Townsend on Twitter, who's also, among other things, very bright, sales-minded guy, has recognized these problems. Rich Barris, who's not a sales guy, but understands politics, he understands what he's seen. This is just simply a weak campaign. You look at DeSantis on the trail, he's very uncomfortable on the trail. He's very uncomfortable talking to regular people. He goes into a diner, few people around him. He makes small talk with a few. It's awkward small talk. You can tell he doesn't want to be there. He will do the smile and even worse, the very weird fake laugh. And it's so weird because, look, a camera is everywhere in 2023, especially when you're on the campaign trail. If you smile and laugh and joke with somebody and then you immediately turn your head and have a scowl on your face, the camera catches that, dude. We've seen it. And we've seen it over and over and over. And it just says, I don't want to be here. I consider myself above this. I'm not having fun. Compare that to Trump. Trump's having fun when he's out there, when he's talking to people. And they're happy to be around him. And they're happy to get pictures with him. And they're happy to fist bump or shake his hand, sign my hat. That's what you're getting from the crowds that start to gather around Trump when he's in a location retail campaigning. Whereas DeSantis comes in the door, people are like, maybe if I don't make eye contact, maybe he won't come up to me. And boy, I mean, you see that especially like in these restaurant kind of situations, like, Iowa, people like looking at their plates, people like, I don't know, no eye contact. If he doesn't see me, he won't come over here. But of course, he's got to go talk to somebody and it's awkward conversation. And this is bad. Again, if DeSantis were even within striking distance, his best chance would be to have strength in an early state. And I think his campaign thought that it could be Iowa. And it's not turning out to be Iowa, mostly because he doesn't do what Iowans want, which is they like being slapped on the back. They like being paid attention to. It's Iowa. That's part of the mystique. That's part of the fame. We're first. Come kiss our butts. We're Iowa. And he's not doing a good job at kissing the butts or kissing the babies when he's on the campaign trail. Positions? What are the positions? The positions, we were told, is that he's basically Trump, but he makes fewer mistakes, and especially around hiring the right people. Well, if anything, your campaign is your portfolio, it's your interview, it's your chance to showcase what you're saying is your unique value as a candidate. And what we've seen are now more than 2 months of straight up mistakes. The launch on Twitter Spaces, that was a mistake. You can spin it however you want it. It was the wrong medium to do it. It wasn't tested. I said ahead of time, hey, this is not a good idea because, look, I've done marketing events. You only get one chance to make a first impression, and there is so much unknown about online formats that you have no control over. Not having control on a first impression is a bad, bad idea. And he plowed forward with it anyway, and it went badly. I still remember, and I took a screenshot of it. You know, here's these people in the space, and there's some kind of technical difficulty. And in the app, at the top of the Twitter space, it says, preparing to launch. And I thought, man, is that not just the perfect statement that defines this campaign in a nutshell? It's always preparing to launch. Wait for the announcement. Wait for the fundraising numbers. Wait for the debates. Wait for Iowa. It's always preparing to launch, but yet it never quite launches. But okay, speaking of launches, let's look at it that way. Let's look at DeSantis. Let's look at him as a product launch. Well, it's easy enough to pick apart the failed Twitter space, the failed launch. But what they all shoved back up under the rug, swept it under, DeSantis already had done a year-long soft launch. Everyone knew he was running. There was no mystery there. That's why we were all talking about it. That's why we were all debating it for over a year. We knew he was running. It was a soft launch. And when you soft launch, that's your chance to get in front of who you think your ideal customers are going to be and use feedback from them so that when you do your hard launch across, nationwide, that you have a bunch of data that you were able to glean from what were going to be your best customers in your target market to really refine things, to really polish stuff. Well, that didn't happen. And that's the failure in all of this, is that he had all of that time to work on it and didn't improve. He didn't get better as a retail candidate. He didn't get better on messaging. He in fact got worse, and he got worse in, I'm still not sure he knows who his target market is. The dog is certainly not eating the dog food at this point. That shows in his numbers. But who is his target market? Was the intent to separate a large percentage of Trump's voters from him, plus get, your traditional establishment GOP, moderates and economic conservative types? Was that the plan? I mean, I don't know. I'm genuinely asking. I don't know what the plan was. Because if the plan was, as it seemed it was going to be, to get a chunk of Trump voters plus all the others, why the early on attempts to burn those bridges? One thing you have to understand about Trump voters, yes, they are very loyal to Trump the man because they view him as somebody who sacrificed a lot for them and who did things and kept promises that no one else did. But one thing that was apparent, even while Trump was in office, And especially around some of the endorsements that he made, his voters let him know quickly when they thought that he had strayed from the core MAGA idea, which is really, I think, is best summed up, make America great again, America first around what? Immigration, economic policy, trade policy, and foreign policy. Meaning, we want the borders closed up. We want a fair chance, to make a dollar out in the marketplace without excessive regulations, and basically rewards going to a few that prevent us from launching businesses or going out in the marketplace and making money. We want a fair playing field on trade policy. We don't want trade deals giving jobs away. Free trade is a misnomer. It's not free if we don't have restrictions, but the other guys do. We want that evened up. And then foreign policy. We want America to be strong, but we don't want to go around fighting everyone else's wars. We've done it. It doesn't work. We're tired of it. And we can't afford it. And so whenever even Trump kind of strayed from those things, his voters bounced back at him. Whenever he endorsed candidates that didn't really embody those principles, but yet there was somebody else running who they felt more embodied those particular principles, that's when they didn't necessarily go along with Trump endorsements. So, yeah, that's what you've got to be if you want to be America first and get Trump voters. Is DeSantis any of those things? Does he have the same immigration policy? Maybe. He talks like it now. He certainly has done some showy things, shipping the illegals up to Martha's Vineyard or whatever. Very cute, very fun. What did he do in Congress? It's a mixed bag. So maybe he's good on immigration, maybe he isn't. Maybe I'll just give him the benefit of the doubt there. Is he good on economic policy? In a typical GOP way, probably consistent voting record with the rest. Again, kind of a wash, but he's also not talking about what Trump does in terms of bringing jobs back home. So that gets to trade policy. And economic and trade go together. Is he going to get us out of things like TPP? Is he going to level the playing field as far as using tariffs as a tool? He actually seems against those things. So he's not a America First MAGA candidate on economic and trade policy. How about foreign policy? Halfway decent statement on Ukraine, which he immediately walked back. It was quite clear he held the finger to the wind. The donors were blowing in a different direction yet again, so he had to walk back something. And Trump voters are not on board with this Ukraine prolonged, escalated war stuff. So it doesn't really look like DeSantis is out there to gather up those voters to me. Does it you? When you look at what his influencers and media people are doing, does it look like he's getting them? Doesn't look like it to me. So what's the strategy? Like, what are you doing? Folks, we're going to take another quick break, and I know we're about to run out the hour here. We're just going to tie up a few loose ends when we get back, and we're going to talk about what we got to do next. Stand by and hang on. All right, folks, we're back. Thank you so much for being with us tonight and with us there through that final ad break of the hour. The boat anchors that we're dragging behind us. Like, what's the plan? What's the strategy? They're still stuck on DeSantis. When we're all moved on to, it's definitely Trump. It's got to be Trump. It's either that or enable the other party taking away our right to choose who our candidates can be. And they're stuck on DeSantis when, you would think, if they were really serious about, we just don't want Trump, that you would start to absorb the fact that DeSantis has just a major objective problem from, what I look at as basic sales and marketing theory. You've done a product launch. Well, you began with a soft launch. You didn't connect with your core customers. You didn't get good information to help you do a better nationwide rollout. When you did a nationwide rollout, it was still mixed messages. You don't really solve a particular problem, especially when your customer has an existing solution provider. You need to separate voters from Trump, who they've already bought. And if you've ever been in sales, one of the hardest things to do is to separate a customer when they have an existing vendor, product, whatever it is that they've already bought, for a lot of reasons. But not the least of which is when you make that decision to let go of one thing that you've bought to buy another to replace it, at some level you're saying, I made a mistake. I screwed up. Very hard to get people to do that. Nobody likes doing that. I don't, you don't. This is human nature kind of stuff, and that's so much of what sales and marketing theory is. It's not a deep science around it. It's just kind of like looking at how people think and make decisions. And nobody in the DeSantis campaign ever understood that if you're going to make somebody switch, you got to make them feel good about it. You've got to take away that sting of, well, you screwed up the first time. So the last thing that you want to do to try to sell somebody a replacement for what they've already got is to talk about how much they screwed up. I frankly can't believe that the DeSantis campaign has gone on this long by telling people what screw-ups that they are. But yeah, that's all we've seen. And we've seen, again, that counterintuitive branding. Not only is he not Trump, he's not better. He's hired a bunch of bad people with bad strategy, bad messaging, especially around the comm stuff. They're not using enough alternate mediums other than Twitter and online. He's not firing those people. He overhired, and he did fire 38 people. He fired 38 people not because they were truly not doing the job, but because he never should have hired those people at the first place. The people he's not firing are the ones responsible for the strategy. This is like if he was a company. He had a C-suite that overhired and then didn't meet their numbers because their strategy failed. They overhired thinking that they were going to hit these lofty goals, and their strategy didn't work. Spread the word.